The Volanthi star drifted through the cold silence of neutral space, her engines humming a low and steady song that had become familiar to her crew of 12 Corveshi merchants over the past several cycles. Captain Shelvok stood at the bridge viewport, his forearms folded behind his back as he watched the distant stars crawl past like frozen fireflies suspended in eternal darkness. He was not in a good mood. The reason for his foul temper sat in the passenger quarters, 3 decks below. Single human male who had been dumped into their care after his research vessel suffered catastrophic engine failure near the Delrath trading post. How much longer until we reach Nexus Station? Shelvok asked without turning around. Navigator Yithra checked her console, her compound eyes reflecting the blue glow of the star maps. 17 more cycles. Captain, she replied in the clicking speech of their kind. We could arrive in 12 if we pushed the engines, but the fuel cost would eat into our profits. Keep the current speed. Shelvok decided. I want this human off my ship, but not at the expense of our earnings. Yithra made a sound of agreement and returned to her calculations. The Corveshi were not a species built for confrontation or adventure. They were traders, merchants, and negotiators who had survived the chaos of the galaxy by being useful to everyone and threatening to no one. Their bodies were tall and thin, covered in a carapace that looked impressive, but was actually quite brittle. Their reflexes were slow compared to most species, and their limbs, while numerous, lacked any real strength. What they did have was patience, excellent memory, and an almost supernatural ability to find profit in any situation. Taking on a stranded human had seemed like easy money at the time. The Terran Transit Authority paid well for the safe transport of their citizens, and Dr. Elliot Vance had offered no complaints when he was brought aboard. He had simply thanked Captain Shelvok, asked where he could sleep, and retreated to his quarters with a small bag of personal belongings that had been 5 cycles ago. And in that time, the human had proven to be the most boring passenger Shelvok had ever encountered. Dar Vance spent most of his time reading from a small electronic device or sketching in a paper journal, actual paper, which the crew found both primitive and oddly charming. He ate his meals alone in his quarters, asked polite questions about the ship when he encountered crew members in the corridors, and never caused any trouble. He was, in every way, completely unremarkable. I do not understand why other species find humans so interesting, Junior Engineer Talek said one evening as several crew members gathered in the common area for their rest cycle. He is small and soft and slow, and he has only 2 arms. How does anyone survive with only 2 arms? They are persistent predators, Yithra offered, recalling what she had read in the galactic databases. Their ancestors hunted by following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They have no claws, no venom, no natural armor, just the ability to keep moving when other creatures would stop. That sounds miserable. Tylek clicked in amusement. It sounds inefficient, Senior Trader Mockville added. No wonder they were so late to achieve space travel. They were too busy walking after animals. The crew shared a series of chittering laughs at this observation. None of them had spent much time around humans. The species was relatively new to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 200 cycles. Most of what the Corveshi knew about them came from database entries and second-hand accounts. The official classification listed humans as Category 3, non-threatening, persistence predators, which placed them somewhere between harmless herbivores and mildly dangerous omnivores on the threat assessment scale. They were known for being adaptable, curious, and surprisingly resilient. But nothing about them suggested they were remarkable in any meaningful way. Vance himself seemed to confirm this assessment perfectly when Yithra passed him in the corridor the next morning. He smiled and raised one hand in what humans called a wave. "Good morning," he said in his soft voice. Beautiful view from the observation deck today. I counted 3 different nebulae. That is nice, Ethra replied. Unsure what else to say. I hope I am not causing any trouble for your crew, Dr. Vance continued. I know taking on a passenger was not part of your plans. You are no trouble, Ethra assured him. Which was true enough. The human nodded, still smiling that small and gentle smile, and continued on his way toward the observation deck with his journal. Tucked under one arm, Ethra watched him go and felt a strange sensation she could not quite identify. There was something about the way he moved, unhurried but deliberate, his eyes taking in everything around him, that seemed different from how he usually appeared. But the moment passed, and she dismissed it as her imagination. Dar Vance was just a human. After all, soft, slow, and completely unremarkable. 3 cycles later, everything changed. The distress signal came in during the night watch, cutting through the normal background radiation of space like a scream through. Silence. Captain Shelvok was roused from his rest cycle and arrived on the bridge to find Ethra already analyzing the transmission. It is coming from a small vessel, approximately 4 hours from our current position, she reported. The signal indicates critical life support failure and requests immediate assistance. Shelvok's mandibles clicked in irritation. Under interstellar salvage laws, any ship receiving a legitimate distress signal was required to render aid or face severe penalties. Ignoring the call was not an option. Change course, he ordered, and wake the crew. I want everyone ready in case we need to perform a rescue operation. What about the human? Ethra asked. Shelvok considered this for a moment before answering. Inform Dr. Vance of the situation, but keep him out of the way. The last thing we need is a soft-skinned passenger getting injured during an emergency. Ethra nodded and went to carry out his orders. As the Volanthi star turned toward the source of the distress signal, none of her crew could have known what waited for them in the darkness ahead. None of them suspected the boring human reading quietly in his quarters would soon teach them a lesson about their galaxy that they would never forget, and none of them understood not yet that the soft and slow and unremarkable Dr. Elliot Vance was about to show them exactly why humans The vessel they found was not what Captain Shelvok had expected. It was a small cargo hauler, battered and old, drifting in the void with no visible damage to its hull. The distress beacon continued to pulse its desperate signal, but as the Volanthi star drew closer, something about the situation made Shelvok's carapace itch with unease. I am not detecting any life signs, Ethra reported from her station. But the ship's systems appear to be functional. The distress signal is automated. Perhaps the crew abandoned the vessel, Mockville suggested. Engine trouble can force evacuation if repairs are impossible. Perhaps, Shelvok agreed. But his voice carried no conviction. He was about to order a deeper scan when the sensors screamed a warning that made every Corvashi on the bridge freeze. In Terra 3 ships emerged from behind a nearby asteroid cluster, their hulls painted in the black and crimson colors that every spacefaring species learned to fear. They were fast and armed and already moving to surround the Volanthi star before she could attempt to flee. Raxians, Ethra whispered, her compound eyes wide with horror. The Raxians were raiders, pirates, and slavers who operated in the lawless regions between major territories. They were reptilian predators who stood nearly 3 meters tall, with scaled bodies built for violence and mouths full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. Their culture valued only strength and cruelty, and they viewed all other species as either prey or property. The distress signal had been a trap, and the Corvashi had walked directly into it. All crew, remain calm, Shelvok announced over the ship's communication system, though his own voice trembled. We are being boarded. Do not resist. I repeat, do not resist. Compliance is our best chance for survival. He knew the statistics. Vraxian raiders sometimes released cooperative prisoners for ransom, but those who fought back were always killed, often slowly and painfully. The airlock breach alarm sounded moments later, followed by the heavy footsteps of armored boots echoing through the corridors within minutes. The entire crew of the Volante Star had been gathered in the main cargo hold, forced to their knees by snarling Vraxian guards who carried plasma pistols and serrated blades that glinted under the harsh lights. There were 8 raiders in total, led by a massive specimen who stood a full head taller than his companions. The left side of his face was a ruin of scar tissue, and where his left eye should have been, there was only an empty socket covered by a metal plate. "I am Corax," the leader announced, his voice a rasping growl that made the Corveshi crew shrink in fear. "Your ship and cargo now belong to me. Your lives belong to me. Everything you have is mine to take or destroy as I wish." None of the Corveshi responded. They kept their compound eyes fixed on the floor, trembling in the submissive posture their species adopted when faced with predators. Corax walked slowly down the line of prisoners, examining each one with his single remaining eye. When he reached the end of the row, he stopped and tilted his head with sudden interest. "What is this?" he asked, and his scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. Dar Elliot Vance knelt at the end of the line, his hands raised like the others, his expression calm and neutral. He looked small next to the towering Corveshi, and impossibly fragile compared to the armored Vraxians surrounding him. "A human," one of the guards answered. "Found him in the passenger quarters." Corax leaned down until his face was level with Elliot's, studying the human with the curiosity of a collector examining a rare specimen. "I have never seen one of your kind in person," the raider captain said. "You are even softer than the stories suggest, like a larva that has not yet grown its shell." Elliot said nothing. His eyes met Corax's gaze without flinching, but he made no aggressive moves. "The exotic markets will pay well for you," Corax continued, straightening up. "Humans are popular with certain collectors. Your species is still new enough to be interesting." He turned to address his crew. "Strip the cargo holds and disable the navigation systems. We will take the ship's computer core as well. These merchants have been traveling for several cycles, so their trade goods should be worth the trouble." The Vraxian guards began to move, spreading through the ship to carry out their captain's orders. 4 remained in the cargo hold to watch the prisoners, their weapons trained on the kneeling crew navigator. Yithra found herself positioned next to Dr. Vance. She could see his face from the corner of her compound eye, and what she saw there confused her. The human was not trembling like the Corveshi, and his breathing remained slow and steady. More strangely, his eyes were moving, not frantically, but with purpose. They tracked the guards, noted the positions of weapons, measured distances and angles with an intensity that seemed wrong for someone who was supposed to be frightened. "Stay still," Yithra whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do not give them a reason to hurt you. If we cooperate, they may let us live." Elliot nodded slightly, the smallest acknowledgement, but his eyes never stopped moving. Minutes passed in tense silence. The guards grew bored, their attention wandering as they waited for their companions to finish looting the ship. Corax stood near the cargo bay doors, speaking into a communication device and occasionally barking orders. Then young Talek made a mistake. The junior engineer had been struggling to control his terror since the moment the raiders appeared. His carapace rattled with involuntary tremors, and his breathing had become rapid and shallow. When one of the guards walked past him, Tillich's fragile composure finally shattered. He bolted. It was a desperate and foolish attempt at escape, driven by pure animal panic. Tillich managed 3 steps toward the far exit before a Vraxian guard intercepted him, grabbing the young Corveshi by his thin neck and slamming him to the ground. "Stupid insect," the guard snarled, drawing his serrated blade. "Let this be a lesson to the others." The blade rose into the air, ready to descend in a killing stroke. What happened next would be burned into Ythra's memory for the rest of her life. Elliot Vance moved. He did not stand up gradually or shift his weight in preparation. One moment he was kneeling beside Ythra, and the next moment he was simply somewhere else. It was as if the universe had blinked and rearranged itself while no one was looking. His hand caught the guard's wrist at the apex of the blade's arc. There was a sound of wet, crunching noise that made Ythra's stomach turn, and the Vraxian screamed. The blade was no longer in the guard's hand. It was in Elliot's. Time seemed to freeze. Every eye in the cargo hold turned toward the human, who stood holding the stolen knife with an ease that suggested he had been born with a weapon in his grip. His face had changed. The soft and gentle expression was gone, replaced by something Ythra had never seen in any species. His pupils had expanded until his eyes looked almost entirely black, and his breathing, still calm, still controlled, had taken on a rhythm that seemed mechanical in its precision. The injured Vraxian staggered backward, clutching his shattered wrist and howling in pain and disbelief. Corax turned from his position by the door, his single eye widening as he processed what he was seeing. "Kill him," the raider captain commanded, but Elliot was already moving again, and Ythra understood with sudden and terrible clarity that the first Vraxian died before anyone fully understood what was happening. Elliot crossed the distance between himself and the nearest guard in the time it took Ythra to draw a single breath. The knife in his hand moved in a blur of silver, and the guard collapsed with a sound that was more surprise than pain. The human did not pause to admire his work. He was already spinning toward the next threat, his body flowing from one motion to the next like water finding its path through rocks. "Shoot him!" Corax roared again, his voice cracking with something that sounded almost like fear. The remaining guards in the cargo hold raised their plasma pistols, but Elliot was no longer where they expected him to be. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible for his soft and fragile body, ducking under the first shot and using a cargo container as cover from the second. Ythra's compound eyes captured everything in fragmented detail, processing the chaos in 1,000 tiny images that her brain struggled to assemble into a coherent picture. She saw Elliot emerge from behind the container and throw the knife with a flick of his wrist. She saw the blade bury itself in a guard's throat. She saw the guard fall and his plasma pistol clatter to the floor. Elliot scooped up the fallen weapon without breaking stride. The third guard managed to get a shot off, but Elliot had already anticipated the angle. He twisted his body sideways, and the plasma bolt scorched the air close enough to singe his shirt, but failed to find flesh. The human's return fire was not so forgiving. 2 shots precise, controlled, deadly, and the third guard crumpled. The fourth guard turned to run, abandoning any pretense of courage. Elliot let him take 3 steps before firing a single shot into the back of his leg. The guard went down screaming, and Elliot was on him in an instant, relieving him of his weapon and delivering a blow to the head that silenced his cries. 4 guards down in less than 15 seconds. The Corveshi crew remained frozen on their knees, too shocked to move or speak. Ythra found herself unable to look away from the human, who stood in the center of the cargo hold, surrounded by fallen enemies. His chest rose and fell with slightly elevated breathing, and there was a thin line of red on his forearm where a blade had grazed him during the fight. But that was the only sign that anything unusual had occurred. His hands were steady, his posture relaxed, and his expression had settled into something that could almost be called calm. It was the calm that frightened Ythra most of all. She had seen predators hunt before. She had watched nature documentaries about the great carnivores of 100 different worlds, but none of them had ever looked like this. None of them had ever seemed so completely and utterly in control. None of them had ever looked like this. None of them had ever seemed so completely and utterly in control. The sound of running footsteps announced the arrival of the remaining raiders. The 4 Vraxians who had been looting the ship came charging into the cargo hold with weapons drawn. Responding to their captain's shouts, they saw their fallen companions and hesitated. Elliot did not give them time to recover. He grabbed the unconscious guard at his feet and hauled the body upright, using it as a shield as he advanced toward the new arrivals. Plasma bolts meant for his chest struck the guard's armor instead, and Elliot fired back through the gaps between the body's limbs. One raider fell with a hole burned through his chest. Another took a shot to the shoulder and dropped his weapon. The remaining 2 tried to spread out and flank the human. But Elliot was already moving. He threw the body at the closer enemy, knocking the Vraxian off balance and closed the distance before the raider could recover. A strike to the knee brought the Vraxian down, and a follow-up blow to the temple ensured he stayed down. The last standing raider turned and fled toward the cargo bay doors, abandoning his wounded companion. Elliot let him go, turning his attention instead to the injured Vraxian who was crawling toward a fallen weapon. A single shot to the raider's hand ended that attempt. "Stay down," Elliot said, and his voice carried a weight that made the words sound less like a command and more like a universal law. The raiders stayed down in the sudden silence that followed. Captain Shelvok became aware that he was still kneeling on the floor with his hands raised. His crew remained in the same position, frozen in place by a terror that had started as fear of the Vraxians and had transformed into something else entirely. The human called Elliot Vance, the soft, slow, boring passenger who sketched flowers in his journal and counted nebulae from the observation deck, stood in the center of the cargo hold with a plasma pistol in one hand and blood that was not his own splattered across his shirt. 6 Vraxians lay on the ground around him, dead or unconscious. Only Korax and the raider who had fled remained unaccounted for, presumably barricading themselves somewhere else on the ship. "Is everyone all right?" Elliot asked, and his voice had returned to its normal, gentle tone, as if he was asking about the weather rather than checking on survivors of a violent encounter. No one answered. The human looked around at the silent crew, and something like concern crossed his face. "I apologize if that was disturbing to watch," he said. "I know your species is not accustomed to violence, but I could not let them hurt the young one." He gestured toward Tilak, who remained curled on the floor where he had fallen, his carapace rattling with uncontrollable tremors. Ithra finally found her voice, though it came out as a barely audible whisper. "How did you do that?" Elliot looked at her with those dark eyes still dilated, still carrying that predator intensity, and seemed to consider the question seriously. "Adrenaline," he said simply. "Humans produce a chemical response when we or those near us are threatened. It increases our speed and strength temporarily, dulls our pain receptors, and helps us focus on the immediate danger." He paused, then added with what might have been embarrassment, "We also have very good reflexes for catching things. It is an evolutionary trait from our ancestors, who needed to grab branches while moving through trees. I saw the knife, and my hand just moved on its own." Ithra stared at him. "That was not just good reflexes," she managed to say. Elliot shrugged, a human gesture of uncertainty that Ithra had learned to recognize. "Perhaps not," he admitted, "but it is not special either. Any human could have done the same in that situation. We are very protective of those we consider part of our group." He said this as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world, as if every human in the galaxy was capable of transforming from a gentle scientist into a killing machine. In the span of a heartbeat, Captain Shelvok slowly rose to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. "The other raiders," he said. "Korax and at least one other are still on the ship." Elliot nodded. checking the charge on his plasma pistol. "I know," he said. "I will handle them. Please stay here and tend to anyone who needs medical attention." He started toward the cargo bay doors, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Does anyone have medical tape?" he asked, holding up his arm to show the shallow cut. "This might get messy, and I would prefer not to leave blood everywhere." Ethra watched him go, her compound eyes tracking his retreating form until he disappeared through the doorway. She understood now why the human had seemed boring. It was not because he lacked depth or ability. It was because he had been holding himself back, keeping the predator inside him carefully contained behind a mask of politeness and gentle smiles. The mask was off now. The cargo hold was silent, except for the soft clicking of Corveshi mandibles and the occasional groan from wounded. Braxian's Captain Shelvok moved through his crew like a ghost, checking on each member with numb efficiency, while his mind struggled to process what he had just witnessed. Tulloch was shaken but unharmed, and the others had escaped physical injury. Their wounds were psychological, the kind that would take longer to heal. "Captain," Ithra said, appearing at his side, "I think you should see this." She held up her data tablet, its screen displaying the Galactic database entry for humans. But this was not the basic information that Shelvok had reviewed before. This was something else entirely. "I accessed the extended files," Ithra explained, her voice carrying a tremor that had nothing to do with fear of the Raxians. "The sections that are normally restricted to military intelligence and first contact specialists. I used my navigator credentials to bypass the civilian filters." Shelvok took the tablet and began to read. The first section was labeled Threat Assessment, revised, and contained information that made his carapace go cold. Persistence predators with extreme adrenal response systems, the entry stated, capable of temporary pain suppression and hysterical strength when subjected to perceived threats. Documented cases include humans lifting vehicles to rescue trapped individuals, humans continuing to fight after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate most species, and humans traveling great distances on foot while carrying wounded companions. The entry continued with increasingly alarming details. Species-wide combat adaptability. Humans demonstrate an unusual ability to use any available object as a weapon, including improvised tools and their own bodies. Historical records indicate that humans achieve dominance on their homeworld, not through physical superiority, but through coordinated group tactics and the relentless pursuit of prey. There was a warning highlighted in red text at the bottom of this section. Note: humans do not possess prey drive inhibition towards sapient life when provoked. Unlike most predator species, humans do not have an instinctive response that prevents them from attacking creatures they recognize as intelligent. This makes them uniquely dangerous in combat situations. Shelvok scrolled down and found another section labeled Environmental Factors. Earth. The human homeworld is classified as a Category 12 death world. The planet features extreme temperature variations, frequent natural disasters, abundant predator species, toxic plant life, and a disease ecosystem of unprecedented complexity. Humans evolved to survive conditions that would eliminate most sapient species within a single generation. The final section was titled simply Recommendations. Do not engage humans in enclosed spaces. Their adaptability and pain resistance make them extremely dangerous in close-quarters combat. If conflict with humans is unavoidable, recommend overwhelming force from maximum distance. And then, in bold text, Category 3 classification applies only to unprovoked humans in neutral situations. No standardized threat rating exists for humans who perceive themselves or their companions to be in danger. Recommend treating all hostile encounters with humans as Category 7, Apex Adaptive Predator Minimum. Shelvok lowered the tablet and looked at Yithra. We had a Category 7 predator sleeping 3 decks below us for 5 cycles, he said. And we thought he was boring. He was being polite, Yithra replied. And there was something like wonder in her voice. He was holding himself back so he would not frighten us. A sound from the corridor made them both flinch. But it was only Dr. Vance returning from his pursuit of the remaining raiders. He walked through the cargo bay doors with the same unhurried stride he had always used, as if he was returning from a stroll through the observation deck rather than a hunt through the ship's corridors. His shirt was more blood-stained than before, but the blood still did not appear to be his own. Korax and his companion have barricaded themselves in the forward storage compartment, Elliot reported, his tone conversational. They have sealed the door and are making threats over the intercom. I do not think they will come out on their own. Are you injured? Captain Shelvok asked, and he was surprised to find that he genuinely cared about the answer. Elliot looked down at himself, as if noticing his condition for the first time. A few scrapes and bruises, he said, nothing serious. The second raider was faster than I expected, but I managed to disarm him before he could do any real damage. He delivered this information with the same casual air that another person might use to describe a minor inconvenience. Senior Trader Mokvel, who had been tending to the wounded Tilek, looked up at the human with wide and fearful eyes. How can you be so calm? He asked, his voice cracking. You just killed 5 beings and incapacitated several others. And you speak of it as if you were discussing the weather. Elliot considered this question with apparent seriousness. I do not enjoy violence, he said after a moment. But I am not troubled by it either when violence is necessary to protect others. Humans have a long history of fighting to defend those we care about. It is built into our nature, for better or worse. He paused, and something that might have been sadness crossed his face. I am sorry if my actions have disturbed you. I understand that your species' experiences conflict differently than mine. If it helps, I want you to know that I was in complete control the entire time. I did not harm anyone who had stopped being a threat, and I tried to minimize suffering where possible. You call that minimizing suffering? Mokvel asked, gesturing at the bodies scattered around the cargo hold. Yes, Elliot said simply. Humans are capable of much worse when we are truly angry. What you saw was not anger, it was efficiency. A chill ran through every Korveshi in the roomie. Yithra stepped forward. Still holding her data tablet, Dr. Vance, she said. I have been reading the restricted files about your species. The things they describe, the pain tolerance, the adrenaline responses, the hunting endurance, are they true? Elliot took the tablet and scanned the contents, his expression thoughtful. Mostly accurate, he said, handing it back, though some of the details are exaggerated. The part about lifting vehicles, for example, only happens in extreme circumstances and usually results in significant injury to the human afterward. We borrow strength from our future selves, in a way, and the part about not having prey drive inhibition. Elliot's face became serious. That part is true, he admitted. Humans do not have an instinct that prevents us from harming other intelligent beings. We rely on our moral reasoning and emotional connections to guide our behavior instead. It means we are capable of great cruelty, but also great compassion. We choose what we become, rather than being limited by instinct. He looked around at the frightened crew and seemed to come to a decision. I know you are afraid of me now, he said, and I understand why. But I want you to know that I would never harm any of you. You gave me shelter when I was stranded. You treated me with kindness. And that makes you my people. Humans protect their people. Always, no matter the cost. The words were meant to be reassuring, but somehow they only made the Korveshi feel smaller. Protecting people, no matter the cost, was exactly what they had just witnessed. and the cost had been measured in blood and broken bodies. Captain Shelvok found his voice at last. What do we do about Korax and the other raider? Elliot turned toward the corridor that led to the forward storage compartment. I will speak with them, he said. Perhaps they can be convinced to surrender peacefully, and if they cannot... The human smiled, and for just a moment, Ythra caught a glimpse of something ancient and predatory behind his gentle expression. Then I will handle it, Elliot said. But I would prefer to avoid more violence if possible. I have already made quite a mess of your ship, and I feel I should apologize for that. He walked toward the corridor, leaving the Corveshi crew to stare at each other in stunned silence. He is apologizing, Tillich whispered. He saved our lives, and he is apologizing for making a mess. That is what makes him terrifying, Ythra replied. He does not think he did anything remarkable. To him, this was just Tuesday. None of them knew what Tuesday meant, but they all understood the sentiment. They had invited a monster aboard their ship, fed it, housed it, and thought it was harmless, and the monster had thanked them for their hospitality. By saving their lives, it was the kind of debt that could The corridor leading to the forward storage compartment was quiet except for the hum of the ship's life support systems and the distant crackle of the intercom. Dr. Elliot Vance walked with measured steps, his plasma pistol held loosely at his side. He had cleaned most of the blood from his hands using a cloth he found in a supply closet. But his shirt was beyond saving. He would need to borrow something from the ship's stores before they reached port. The intercom speakers buzzed with static. And then Korax's voice filled the corridor. I know you are coming. Human, the raider captain snarled. I have heard what you did to my crew. But do not think you have won. I have barricaded this door with cargo containers, and I will kill you the moment you try to breach it. Elliot stopped a few meters from the sealed door and looked up at the nearest intercom panel. Captain Korax, he said, his voice calm and conversational. I would like to propose an alternative to further violence. A harsh laugh echoed through the speakers. You think I will surrender to you? After what you did to my warriors? You are a fool if you believe that. I think you will surrender because you are intelligent enough to understand your situation. Elliot replied. You have seen what I can do, and you know that I could breach that door if I wanted to. I am choosing not to because I believe there is a better outcome available, one where you and your remaining companion walk away alive. There was silence from the intercom for a long moment. What are you proposing? Korax asked, and some of the bravado had drained from his voice. Surrender peacefully, and I will ensure you are handed over to the Transit Authority alive. You will face trial for piracy and attempted kidnapping, which will likely result in imprisonment rather than execution. It is not a pleasant future, but it is a future. And if I refuse? Elliot's expression did not change, but something in his voice shifted, a subtle hardening that carried more weight than any threat. Then I will breach that door, and you will discover that everything I have done so far was me being gentle. Another long pause. Gentle? Korax repeated, and there was genuine confusion in his tone. You killed 6 of my warriors in less than a minute. I disabled 6 of your warriors, Elliot corrected. 4 of them are still alive, though they will require medical attention. I could have killed all of them if I wanted to. I chose not to because unnecessary death serves no purpose. Why should I believe you? Because I am telling you the truth, Elliot said. Humans have many flaws, but we generally keep our word when we give it. If I promise you will reach the Transit Authority alive, that is exactly what will happen. The intercom went silent again, and Elliot waited patiently. He could hear muffled voices behind the door, Korax and his companion arguing in their native language. Finally, there was a heavy clunking sound as the barricade was moved aside, and the door slid open. Korax stood in the doorway, his single eye fixed on Elliot with an expression that mixed hatred and fear in equal measure. Behind him, the surviving raider had already dropped his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. "I want you to understand something," Korak said, his voice low and bitter. "I have fought against many species in my years of raiding Kaveshi. Malvery, Draxon, and others. None of them have ever made me feel fear." He stepped forward, close enough that Elliot could smell the acrid scent of his scaled skin. "You are the first," the raider captain continued. "And I do not like it." Elliot met his gaze without flinching. "Fear is a useful emotion," he said. "It helps us recognize when we are outmatched and should retreat. There is no shame in feeling it, only in letting it control you." Korax's mandibles clicked in what might have been dark amusement. "You are a strange creature, human. Brutal and gentle in the same breath. I do not understand you." "Most species say that about us," Elliot admitted. "We do not always understand ourselves either." He stepped aside and gestured for the raiders to precede him down the corridor. "The cargo hold is this way. The crew will restrain you until we reach port, but I will make sure you are treated fairly." Korax walked past him with his head held high despite his defeat, maintaining what dignity he could in the circumstances. The other raider followed with considerably less composure, casting nervous glances at the human who had single-handedly destroyed their raiding party. When they reached the cargo hold, the Kaveshi crew was waiting with restraints that Mokvo had retrieved from the ship's security locker. The raiders were bound without incident and placed in a corner under guard, though the guards kept their distance and their weapons. Trained with trembling hands, Captain Shelvok approached Elliot as the situation was brought under control. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt inadequate but were all he had to offer. "You saved my ship and my crew. I do not know how to repay such a debt." Elliot waved his hand dismissively. "No debt is owed. You gave me passage when I needed it, and I helped when I could. That is how community works, is it not?" "Perhaps among humans," Shelvok replied. "Among Korveshi, such actions would be remembered for generations." The human smiled his gentle smile. And this time, Euthra found it less unsettling than before. She was beginning to understand that the softness was as genuine as the predator lurking beneath it. "Then remember it however you wish," Elliot said. "But please do not think of me as anything special. I am just a xenobiologist who studies alien plants. The fighting was a temporary necessity, not my true nature." Euthra doubted that was entirely accurate, but she chose not to argue. The remainder of the journey to Nexus Station passed without incident. The Vraxian raiders were kept under constant guard, though they made no attempts to escape. Korax in particular seemed to have accepted his fate, spending most of his time staring at the human with an expression that suggested he was still trying to understand what he had encountered. Dr. Vance returned to his normal routine of reading and sketching, though the crew now watched him with new eyes. Every movement he made, every glance he cast, was analyzed for signs of the predator they had witnessed, but Elliot gave them nothing. Behaving exactly as he had before the attack, it was Tulek who finally worked up the courage to approach him. "Dr. Vance," the young engineer said, his voice hesitant, "I wanted to thank you for saving my life. If you had not acted when you did, the Braxian would have killed me." Elliot looked up from his journal and smiled. "You are welcome, Tulek. I am glad I was able to help. May I ask you something?" "Of course," Tulek hesitated, clicking his mandibles nervously. "When you grabbed that knife, what were you thinking? What was going through your mind in that moment?" Elliot considered the question with the same seriousness he brought to everything. "I was not thinking anything," he admitted. "There was no time for thought. I saw the blade coming down toward you, and my body moved on its own instinct and training taking over where conscious decision could not keep up." "Instinct," Tulek repeated. "Your instinct was to protect a stranger from a different species." "You are not a stranger," Elliot said. "You are a member of my crew, my people. at least for the duration of this voyage. Humans do not abandon their people. The words settled over Tillich like a warm blanket, comforting and terrifying in equal measure when the Volante Star finally docked at Nexus Station. Transit Authority officers came aboard to take custody of the Vraxian prisoners. There were questions and reports and bureaucratic processes that consumed several hours. But eventually, everything was sorted Dr. Elliot Vance gathered his small bag of belongings and prepared to disembark the entire Corveshi crew assembled in the airlock to see him off, all 12 of them standing in a row like an honor guard, their compound eyes tracking the human with a respect that bordered on reverence. "Thank you for your hospitality," Elliot said, shaking hands with Captain Shelvok in the human fashion. "I hope the rest of your voyage is peaceful and profitable, Dr. Vance," Shelvok replied. "If you ever need passage again, the Volante Star will always have a place for you." The human smiled, nodded to each crew member in turn, and walked off into the crowded station within moments. He had disappeared into the flow of alien bodies, a small, soft-looking creature surrounded by dozens of species that towered over him and carried weapons that could tear him apart. None of them had any idea what walked among them. Navigator Yithra watched until she could no longer distinguish the human from the crowd, then turned away with a complicated feeling in her thorax. Later that evening, Captain Shelvok filed a revised report with the Merchant Guild, recommending a change to official policy regarding human passengers. "Humans should be reclassified immediately," he wrote. "Current Category 3 designation is dangerously inadequate. Recommend minimum Category 7, Apex Adaptive Predator." Additional note, despite their combat capabilities, humans respond extremely well to courtesy and inclusion. Recommend treating all human passengers with politeness and respect. They are protective of those they consider friends and can be valuable allies in dangerous situations. He paused, then added a final line. "Personal observation. The humans have a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick." Having met Dr. Elliot Vance, I do not believe any of them actually need the stick. In her own quarters, Yithra made a similar note in her personal log. "Today, I learned why humans survived their death world long enough to reach the stars," she recorded. "It is not because they are the strongest,